Welcome to the Council of Better Business Bureau's podcast, Better Business, Better Series, where we will explore top-of-mind topics with business and industry leaders to understand the leading trends and innovations that continue to push the envelope in today's marketplace.
For the Better Business, Better Series podcast, I'm Will Johnson. We are here at the SOAR Community Network Summit in Alexandria, Virginia, and I'm joined by Bruce Van Horn. Bruce, thanks for being here.
My pleasure, Will. Thanks.
Bruce is a dad, a writer, a coach, entrepreneur, speaker, podcaster, and runner. All of the above, right?
Basically, on any given day.
And I understand your personal motto is life is a marathon, so let's train for it.
Yes.
Tell us how you came into being an entrepreneur and a speaker. So a little bit about yourself and your background.
Okay, yeah, so I've been an entrepreneur probably for most of my adult life. I started my first company back, in the mid-'80s, right out of college, and did not do very well. I wound up filing bankruptcy by the time I was 27 years old. And, so I bounced around between working for Fortune 100 companies in marketing, and then I wound up starting another company and bounced around in that. Basically, I wound up through an interesting twist of events, I wound up being on the forefront of the .com boom. And so I was very instrumental in helping some of the Fortune 100 companies and government agencies like the United States Postal Service track packages and really building, data-driven e-commerce websites. So I started my own company in 2002, and it still exists, although I'm basically a silent partner now. And I wound up, how I got to doing what I do now, speaking and coaching and writing books, really comes from the path of, even though what I was doing in the software development, high-tech world, even though I was good at it, I was competent at it, it was draining the life out of me.
Yeah.
I was just not...
Wasn't firing you up.
It wasn't where my real core values are, my gifts are. And so I'd gotten tricked into, what is common in our culture, that we think that making money will make us happy, getting, promotions, climbing the corporate ladder. I was seeking a sense of fulfillment and happiness outside of myself. In the midst of this, I was, I experienced, my daughter passed away in the year 2000. Because of that, I was woefully underinsured for that, and the medical expenses were astronomical. And so I wound up filing bankruptcy again.
Wow.
And so by the time I was 42 years old...
You'd experienced a lot of life.
So my biggest fear or thing I dreaded the most every day was waking up. And couldn't wait for the day to just end, without some other tragedy happening. I didn't even like being a dad at the time.
I'm assuming you had other children.
Yes, I have two boys.
Okay.
They are currently 20 and 14,
Okay.
so 6 years in between them, and they're doing great.
Right.
And I now love being a dad, where I didn't. And so
But at the time, it was... You were low.
Quite frankly, Will, I was looking for bridge overpasses.
Yeah.
I was done.
Yeah.
And through a very interesting twist of events, my older brother, I live in Richmond, Virginia. My older brother came to town in November of 2005 to run the Richmond Marathon.
Okay.
And after he was done, he said the most absurd thing I had ever heard in my life. He said, "Bruce, you ought to do this." I laughed just like that. I said, "That is the stupidest."
Probably how a lot of people would react.
The stupidest thing because I was a little bit overweight, but I was woefully out of shape.
Yeah.
And I live like many people do. I live in a community where, my goodness, there's a Walmart down the street.
Yeah.
So everything I need is within a 5-minute drive. So I don't even like to drive 26 miles unless I'm going on vacation.
Sure.
So the idea of running that was just absurd. And he said something to me that I didn't realize it at the time. He's not a life coach, inspirational, motivational speaker. He just said, "Bruce, the hardest part about running a marathon is making the decision to do it."
Yeah.
I was pretty sure he was full of it, because I'm pretty sure the hardest part about running a marathon was the running part. But he did inspire me to join a gym, and I started working out, and I started enjoying it. I started jogging on a treadmill, and I was enjoying that. And in the spring of 2006, I enrolled in my first ever 5K, and that was actually fun.
Yeah.
And then I ran a 10K, and that was even more fun. And I was, for the first time in so many years, I had found something in my life that was bringing me pleasure. And I still was very unhappy in my career. I was very unhappy in my home situation, but I was enjoying running. So I took this challenge and I started training that during the summer of 2006 for my first ever marathon. And it was later in the summer, it was August 2006, where I literally had this, oh my God, moment. And I realized my brother was right, because I was out on an 18-mile training run that early August morning.
And your mind goes to interesting places on an 18-mile run.
Oh, it goes to way interesting places, you know. But here I was. I had shifted. It was no longer I want to be a marathon runner someday. I had already self-identified. I hadn't run the race yet, but in my mind, I was a marathon runner.
And so maybe the hardest thing was just deciding to do it, like your brother said.
Well, this was the epiphany that early that morning. I came to a complete stop in the middle of the road because it all dawned on me. I had completely transformed my body, and I realized that my brother had been right all along. But what I misunderstood was I thought he was talking about, the hardest part about running a marathon is making the decision to do it. I thought he was talking about a decision you make once. But what it takes to change your life is making that decision every single day. That's why it's the hardest. Because you can't subcontract marathon training. You can't get the neighbor, you can get the neighbor kid down the street to cut your grass if you don't feel like it, but you can't hire that kid to do your 18-mile training runs.
Yeah.
And so the success or failure of running a race as long as a marathon is 100% personal responsibility.
And you make it every time you go on a run.
It's all me.
Yeah.
I can't blame anybody else if I hit the snooze button. If I just blow a run off because I'm not feeling like it, it's 100% on me. And you also can't do it with a negative attitude, because I learned that the minute the brain says, you know what, this is stupid, the feet scream, hallelujah. We've been telling you that for the last 18 miles. The couch loves us.
Yeah.
Let's go back to the couch. And so I realized that I had completely, as it related to running, I had completely eliminated all of the I'm not good enough, I can't do this, marathon running is for other people. I had eliminated that negative self-talk from my life. But what I also realized that had you asked me early that morning, because I still had this huge chip on my shoulder, I was an angry person.
Yeah.
And if you had said to me, Bruce, what's your problem? I would have immediately been able to rattle off and say, Will, here's my list of problems.
Yeah.
And here's my list of people or circumstances or situations that are to blame for my problems. The financial problems, the relationship problems, the death of my daughter, all of that. Guess who is not on that list?
You.
No accountability.
Yeah.
And I realized that just like running a marathon, maybe the circumstances weren't within my control, but how I talk to myself, the story that I tell myself, and how I respond to it is 100%. So my experience of those situations is 100% my responsibility.
Yeah.
And maybe, just maybe, if I can start applying those same techniques to my finances, to my career, to my parenting,
Yeah.
maybe the rest of my life could change too. So I set off on this pursuit of personal development through really analyzing what is the story that I tell myself, and is it true? So I wound up on this path. I originally went to college as an English creative writing major. I never wanted to be in high tech.
Yeah.
I was going to be a writer from the get-go. So I started getting back to what I was super enthusiastic about from the time I was 14 years old. I started writing. I started talking to people. They started asking me, Bruce, what's going on? And I started telling them about the changes. And so I didn't set out to be a life coach or an executive coach. It was people noticed the change in my life, and they asked me to speak into their lives just by saying, well, what did you do? And how could I take what you did and apply it to my life? And then I got the ultimate test, because we sometimes think that when things are really bad in our lives, that they will always continue to be bad, and that's where I was.
That's the expectation.
Right, that's where I was when I was looking at bridge overpasses. My life for the last 15 years has been nothing but hardships, and it will always be that way, so why bother?
Yeah.
But then you start to think, too, that when things are really good, it's always going to be good. Mm-hmm. And so I finally, at that point, had my life really dialed down to where I wanted it to be, and then February 17th, 2014, my doctor called and said, I don't know how to tell you this, but you've got stage 4 prostate cancer.
Good Lord.
I had just turned 50 years old. Yeah. So, it kicked my butt for a couple days, but then I remembered all my training. It's how we respond to this. I could say, you know what, all right, my life is over, because you can die from this stuff. Or, my life will never be the same. So it would have been so easy to lapse back into victim mode. And I told my boys, I said, here's the situation, because by this time I'm a single dad. I have full custody of my 2 boys. And, that's another story. But, so my boys are totally dependent on me.
Yeah.
And so I sat them down. I said, I don't know how this turns out, but I do know that how we think it will turn out will greatly shape how it ultimately does.
Yeah.
So we're going to go through all the stuff, all the treatment, but we're going to assume that there's lessons in this, because I can now look back at all of the quote-unquote tragedies of my life and see the lessons that I learned in them. And so we can, it's easy to look back in our lives and connect the dots. The trick is to take this current dot and say, okay, I don't know what this dot means, but let's assume that there's a lesson in this too, and we can use it for further growth, further advancement.
See where it goes next.
And that really launched to where I am and where I have been for the last 3 years, out of which I started a podcast called Life is a Marathon. So I totally invite anybody to listen to that, lifeisamarathon.com. I've got 2.5 million listeners in 211 countries.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's been a wild ride. So I'm writing, I'm speaking, and just really using my experiences to help other people shift the way they think about life, the way they think about business.
And when so you've transferred a lot of this experience and what you've been through to business and team leaders. How do you take that lesson of all of what you've just spoken about and then begin to talk to businesses and how it applies? I mean, there's some obvious messages in there,
right? And
maybe some not so obvious messages.
Yeah, I think the obvious message, or the
I wouldn't say obvious, but some easily understandable relationships between.
And part of what I'm going to talk about today is I'm going to intentionally step on some toes and talk about words, and how one particular word means something completely different than what we really think it means, and that's the word passion.
Okay.
And we certainly live in here we are in Washington, D.C., where we're talking about ambition and hustle and grind and, all of this drive that, and so you think about, business within the greater D.C. area, you think cutthroat, you think competition, you think 100-hour work weeks, and you think passion. Right, and we're told to follow our passion, but what I've realized is, the word passion itself literally is a Latin word that means suffering.
Okay.
Follow your suffering.
Yeah. It's a little different from what you
it doesn't
described.
make any sense. But what we get tricked into, as I talk to most business owners, there was something inside them that prompted them to start their business, to create the product, to create the service. It was a desire that was inside that wanted to be expressed outwardly, which is exactly what the word enthusiasm means.
Okay.
The word enthusiasm is a Greek word that means God within. Mm-hmm. And so it's sort of that same flame, but it's an internal thing that seeks to be expressed outwardly. Whereas passion is, there's this thing outside and I've got to go get it and bring it into my experience of life.
Yep.
So it shows up very often, but it's a different type of energy. And so what I talk to people about is creation versus competition. Because if you're totally focused on creating the best product or service that you know how to create, and you are creating that for specific customers who will greatly benefit from it, and you're focused on creating the best customer experience, it never occurs to you to look over your shoulder to see who's competing against you.
Right. You're at the top of your game, and you're running your business or your
right,
life
and your customers are directly meant to be your customer,
right.
And so if somebody else does business with somebody else, you're like,
okay.
Hey, blessings, you know, their service better met your needs, and that's what I want for you. I'm not competing against you. I'm trying to create, a solution for whatever your situation is. And the moment I start looking at my competitor and I think, oh, well, they just produce this type of widget, I need to produce something similar at a lower price.
You're just chasing somebody else.
You've totally shifted the energy of why you started your company to begin with.
So your idea then, if correct me if I'm wrong, is tapping into enthusiasm in that word.
Enthusiasm, right. But let's get
Passion's not all bad.
Passion isn't bad, and a lot of people will talk about passion, and they'll be describing the energy of enthusiasm.
Right.
They've just gotten caught up in the colloquialism of using that word passion.
Right.
Where,
Yeah, there's something. Enthusiasm does a better job of describing that experience of as you say, when somebody's owns a business, they haven't gotten there because by accident, right?
Right.
I mean, usually, or if they've started something, they had something inside them that wanted to come out.
Right.
So that's where that
and then in the
comes
doing of the thing, So I'll talk to president CEOs who started the company, and now they're 500 employees, they're hundreds of millions of dollars in sales, and they'll remember the day they started it in the garage.
Yeah.
When it was,
you hear people speak
will
like
use
that. Yeah.
they'll use the word, it was my passion, but when they describe it, it was just it was a gift. They saw it.
Yeah.
And
you hear people missing those days, right? Where it was
right,
tough
because
and
now
challenging.
that we're in the doing of the thing, and we're looking at expense reports and profit margins, and and somebody else coming in and encroaching on our territory, and so they've lost why they started the business to begin with. And so if they'll come back to that, and then if HR will hire people who are enthusiastic about being sales reps or marketing reps or secretaries or stock clerks,
everybody wins.
If everybody's doing something that they're enthusiastic about, the energy is contagious. And if you look at the really, really outlier successful businesses, the overall arching energy in those businesses is about creation. It's not about competition. It's an enthusiasm. Yeah.
Bruce Van Horn, thanks for your enthusiasm and its inspiring message and words, and your life story is fascinating and really one to I think for anybody who's thinking about changes or challenges or difficult times, and then even good times, to be ready for whatever comes your way.
Right.
All right. Bruce Van Horn, is there a place people can find out more about you?
I've made it really easy.
Okay.
BruceVanHorn.com.
Boom. That's easy.
Yeah.
Right.
If you want to grab my marathon, Life is a Marathon podcast, lifeisamarathon.com. But if you wind up on BruceVanHorn.com, there's a link to the podcast.
Got it. Great. Thanks very much. And
my pleasure.
Thanks for joining us here in the midst of a busy day here at the SOAR Community Network Conference in Alexandria, Virginia. For the Better Business, Better Series podcast, I'm Will Johnson.
You just enjoyed Better Business, Better Series podcast. Be sure to tune in next month for a brand new episode. To learn more about our other shows, visit betterbusiness.blueberry.com. That's betterbusiness.blueberry.com and subscribe. The thoughts and opinions expressed on this podcast are the views and opinions of the guests, not those of the Better Business Bureau, Council of Better Business Bureaus, or program affiliates. This podcast is for information and educational purposes only and is copyrighted with all rights reserved. This podcast is protected by Blueberry's Terms of Service.